Did you first grow curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to House of Asher.
And welcome everybody. This is your host, Steve Asher, and you are listening to House of Asher. We are going out across the international airwaves on Para UK Radio, and also through, Skype, or not Skype, SoundCloud and iTunes and all those different ones, Spotify and whatnot. It's actually getting to be a pretty decent sized radio thing going on now, and we're actually on episode 96. And the cool thing is having interesting people on, and that's, well, what I always try to do each episode. But sometimes folks really stand out in their field, and I'm not just talking about potato farmers. I'm talking about people that have really done something of interest and something that helps people. And our next guest is such a gentleman, and I'm going to do a quick bio for him real quick before we get into some deep talk. Our guest today is Ronald Feyl Enright. He's a demonic investigator and assessment for demonic possession. He looks into demonic infestation and demonic oppression. Archbishop Ronald Feyl and the Sacred Order of St. Michael, the Archangel Order of Exorcist, is not under the Vatican. It is an autonomous and independent branch of the Catholic faith, which derives from the ancient Old Roman Catholic Church of the 12th century. And if you're interested in checking out his page, even though he's retired, but he has lots of great forums, check out www.orderofexorcists.com. And we're fixing to have Mr. Ron on, and here we go. Hey, Ron, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good. Start to say it would be a really difficult interview if we could not. So, welcome to the show, and I appreciate you being on. Like I said, it's one of those things, you're a busy guy, I'm a busy guy, you know how it is. So, again, I appreciate you being on. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing fine, and I want to thank you for having me on.
Sure.
It's very nice.
Absolutely. Well, I will tell you, and I'm sure you probably get one or two things right out of the gate. I was a 70s kid. I'm 49 now, and I've seen a lot of different, scary shows and whatnot, but obviously the film The Exorcist, when I was very small, really stayed with me. It was very jarring, and a lot of times you hear that different movies have a lot of Hollywood elements, and I'm sure there's an element of that there as well. But the one thing I'd always heard is that it really opened the eyes to non-Catholics as just to how insidious possession is, and it really kind of I won't say invigorated the what we call it, the treatment of that problem. But when you take someone who's kind of out of a community that wasn't raised with it, it's very startling to people. What brought you into wanting to be an exorcist? Give us a little bit of your Batman origin story.
Well, I guess it all started with what I refer to as a divine calling, which I received when I was 11, 12 years old. I was just a young child. And that's when I had my first supernatural experience, if you will. And very briefly, I will tell you that I was, again, very young, 11 to 12. I was in the bathroom taking a shower, and something very unusual took place, especially for a young kid, as the way I was. It was a bright light that just glared into the bathroom. It illuminated the entire bathroom, and at that time it was almost blinding. And I could remember the incident as it was yesterday, because these are the type of things that stay with you forever. It's more of a traumatic experience, if not anything else. So you start remembering details, especially when you start talking about it. At that time, I had what I would refer to and believe was a divine vision. I saw myself in the future wearing a Roman collar, that's a clergy shirt, and being a priest and ministering to people. Now, I didn't see myself as an exorcist, but I did see myself as a clergyman. And that was way back then. Now, that to me was a divine message from God. As a result, as I got older, Back in the mid-70s, I received holy orders, which is being ordinated into the priesthood. And then in the early 80s, I was elected to be bishop within that jurisdiction of the church. And then at that point, I received what's referred to as consecration, which elevated me to a full bishop. At that point, this was back in the early 80s, I established an order called the Order of Exorcist. And this was a special order that just focused in on the ministry of exorcism, which is a full-time ministry that we specialized in. And as a result, I developed a program, and this is after receiving requests from people who belonged to our church who were asking a priest to come to their house because something strange was happening. Things that started to manifest that would be considered supernatural. Things in the household, people in the household started to act strangely, and unbelievable things would occur. Now, you mentioned the movie The Exorcist. I have to tell you that real life is more scary and will always be more scary than what you will see on the silver screen. In other words, the movie itself maybe just touched on what reality is all about in regards to demonic possession. And believe me, it could be very traumatic for the individual who actually has either experienced or had a member who has experienced this type of behavior. So all these things are done behind closed doors. The cameras and recordings and things of that nature would never be allowed in the room, in the ritual room. Reason being is, this is the lowest point of a human being where he's going through mental anguish, where he's physically deteriorating almost immediately within the eyes of anyone who happens to be witnessing the whole episode. And as a result, this would be not only embarrassing, humiliating, but it would be such a private thing that any true person who is possessed by a demonic entity would not want this to be revealed to the public. It's a very private, confidential thing.
Right.
So when you see things in the movies like The Exorcist, or movies that, that basically portray people who are possessed by a demonic entity, they're just touching the surface of the reality that actually takes place.
Well, let me ask you this, Ron. And like I said, that's one of the big reasons I want to have you on, because like you said, the thing that I had gotten from growing up listening to guys like Art Bell and had like Father Malachi Martin and things like that on, it was like, oh, they'll touch on The Exorcist or Emily Rose or something like that, and they'll go, oh, it's much worse. I mean, and because it's like you said, it's not on a screen, it's a person in front of you. You're sharing the anguish, you're empathizing with their pain. The smells are real, the sounds are real, all the change of sort of the pressure in the room or the temperatures in the room. Which I was going to ask you that too. What are some of the onset signs? Because I understand with oppression, and it develops further on into like possession. Can you talk a little bit about the steps and some of the warning signs of demonic possession?
First of all, one of the things that we all have to be aware of is that this condition that we refer to as demonic possession can also be something that's also referred to as a mental illness. Now, they're not the same, but they do mimic one, and they do mimic each other. So as a result, you have to make sure that what you're dealing with is a genuine, actual demonic entity. Or if you proceed to perform a ritual and the person has a mental illness, some form of psychosis, then what you're doing is you're driving that person deeper within their delusions, and as a result, it could drive them to suicide. So this is very, very important. The assessment has to be done, And the assessment involves the individual, his history, his health, his psychological profile. It also involves the actual environment that he lives in. This would be anything that is manifested within his immediate space. If this happens, then we have to look further into it. It's not just one thing. It has to be a number of things happening at one time. For example, a person that levitates, okay, this is not considered a mental illness. In fact, very few people would say that it is, because it's simply not. This is a supernatural event that occurs when the personality of a supernatural entity happens to possess a human being. Then the laws of gravity no longer apply. Everything that you could ever imagine will start taking place. And when it does, and if you happen to be either the person assisting the exorcist, or maybe one of the team members, or maybe just one of the family members of the person that's possessed, then this would be an experience you will never, ever, ever forget. Even what's referred to as a demonic infestation, if this occurs, this is where the physical manifestations of things in the room start moving. Things start flying across the room. I could recall a case back in the early 80s where I was involved in an exorcism. And I wasn't the exorcist. I was just assisting. You see, to become an exorcist, you have to be appointed by the church. And then after that, you have to go through an on-the-job training. The reason being is you're an apprentice to the actual exorcist. In most cases would be a bishop. For me, my training was 4 years under a bishop. This bishop specialized in the ministry of exorcism. And so there I started learning, if you will, the trade. And this is all I did. Did not have to pastor a church, did not have a ministry, a hospital ministry or prison ministry. All my concentration and training was in the ritual of exorcism and what to see, what to find, and what to do, and how to behave when you encounter this type of supernatural thing. So again, a lot of this is really based on your own belief system in regards to how you perceive these things. But I will tell you that mental illness and a lot of the things that portray mental illness can mimic possession and vice versa. So as a result, you have to make sure that you know exactly what you're dealing with. Because if you are mistaken, if you do something and go through the ritual and support the delusions of a person that has a psychosis, there's a very good possibility that this person can be very self-destructive and be pushed to suicide. So this is a very serious thing.
Well, let me ask you this. Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm going to ask you something when you're done.
Okay. I'm talking about this case in the early 80s. I was assisting the exorcist, and I was a young priest at that time. Something flew. This was at an old hotel in the downtown Los Angeles area. And as a result, we were in a room. The door was open. Something flew out of another room. It literally went at a 45-degree angle and went into the room that we were actually performing the exorcism. The object hit one of the priests. There were two of us, okay, on the head. And as a result, this was really devastating. I've never seen anything actually make a complete angle like that and actually turn the corner and enter a room and fly directly to one of the priests who was performing the exorcism. So it was very frightening. I'll never forget that episode. However, there are many stories like that. In my career, almost 40 years, which is a long time. In my career, I'd say I have done probably over 800,000 demonic assessments. That's a lot. And in those over 800,000, I actually did and performed a ritual of exorcism on only just over 2,000 people, which tells you that the numbers are small because the condition is rare. not because it's not there or present, because most times it's misdiagnosed. It's reviewed to as a mental illness. And a lot of these people who are in mental institutions have actually experienced being possessed by some type of demonic entity. And as a result, they are committed for life in these institutions. So after saying that, I will say this. Out of 100 cases that are reported of some type of demonic disturbance, whether it be a demonic infestation or a demonic possession, whatever the case is in regards to demonic issues, I would say probably about 10%, and that's being very generous, but I'll say maybe 10% might be actually a genuine event that's taking place. Out of that 10%, 8% of that 10% would actually be genuine cases of demonic possession.
Well, let me ask you this, and at this point, and this was actually the question I was going to ask a minute ago. When you start touching on, the fact that you do have people that are delusional or have some sort of condition or whatever that's causing them to have different symptoms, do you have someone that's sort of a go-between, a medical person, a psychologist, psychiatrist, someone that's part of the team or sort of part of your group, or some sort of confidant that you can kind of pull in that can take a look at this person to help you verify if there is a medical condition there, what it is? Because I know a lot of people talk about the gift of discernment, which I assume you guys got. But once it goes to that point, like you said, when it is a mental condition, what do you do? And what kind of person helps you with that?
Okay, what we have in this organization that I created so many years ago, part of the structure of the organization was to do three things. Number one, make an assessment based on the person's profile. Therefore, we have and always had 3 medical doctors who are psychiatrists. These are the people that would actually review the psychological profile and make their assessment in regards to what their findings are. And then that would be submitted to yours truly. I would also say that the reports of the assessments for the actual investigation would be submitted directly to me by the lead investigator. The lead investigator would make first contact and interview. And in that first contact interview, it is being filmed and recorded. There's a series of questions that I designed back in the early 80s. The questionnaire, which, as I refer to, is called the process. The process consists of 3 sections. 1 would be the psychological profile of the individual being interviewed. 2 would be his health condition as to what his health history is. All these things can contribute to what we might say mimics the signs of possession. The third thing, of course, would be the physical manifestations that are taking place in the room while the investigation is being conducted. We would look at things if things start moving, for example, or you'll hear glass shattering when there's no evidence of any physical pieces of glass or windows that are shattering. Or could be a breeze that is so strong, like almost hurricane magnitude, and you'd feel it across the room, even though all the doors and windows are closed. It could be things that are not only flying off the shelves, but also wallpaper peeling from the surface by itself, as well as other things that may appear to be what would look like blood or even dark urine that would actually fall from the ceiling, and it would fall on everyone who is in the room. This is just a tad of what demonic infestation would be. We're not talking about possession. We're talking about an infestation where there are one or multiple demonic entities that are in the room, and they're trying to get your attention away from the actual focal point, which would be, of course, the individuals who are experiencing all of these things. And as they are, we as a team would also witness and document. Now, these things would be sent to my attention by my investigators. Each team of investigators are under a bishop. The bishop has a jurisdiction within his ministry. The ministry itself that he has can consist of a series of parishes, churches, if you will, or it could just simply be a number of other religious institutions. This bishop would have his jurisdiction, but within his jurisdiction, he would have also a ministry of exorcism. That ministry would consist of lay people who are investigators and who are also intuitive. And these are people that would record everything they see, everything they witness, any feelings or emotions they may have at the time of the interview. Once that occurs, then it's all documented and placed in a report, along with a copy of their psychological profile of the victim, as well as their medical history. All this information would be submitted to my office. I would review all of it. As for the psychological reports, I would send those off to our psychiatrists who are within our organization. They would look at it, review it. Based on the information, they would send me their recommendations, what their feelings are, what their interpretations are in regard to the person's condition. At that point, I would read their reports. I would also review all the tape interviews and all the questionnaires, which consist of 3 sections, as I mentioned, which is the psychological, the health, and also the physical manifestations that should be taking place within that space. So after I review all of that, I use what you referred to earlier as discernment. I would use that as well as all the years of my experience in doing, as I said, over 800,000 cases of assessments of cases regarding demonic issues. I would use all that information that I have and know and knowledge and pray. And then I will make a final decision in regards to whether or not a ritual of exorcism is actually warranted based on the evidence. Everything, as far as I'm concerned, has to be based on evidence. If there is no evidence in existence, then it's just hearsay. People, and that is human nature, we all want attention. We all want to be recognized for something. We all want people to think that we are special. And in essence, we are, each of us. However, it can also fall into a borderline psychosis. And when that happens, it becomes an obsession where they feel they need the attention of organizations such as the one I've created. So as a result, we have to weave through each and every one of those reports. And that is after following the process I just described.
Now, you were discussing about the process. Now, how does this pull down in regards of, was this something that's just been part of your faith for, a millennia, for however long it's been going, or is this something that's been constantly built and kind of added to and made, it kind of grows as different situations grow?
Okay, well, your questions are actually several questions in one, and I'm going to address each one of them, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, faith, of course, is something that an individual's belief is based on, whether it be part of their product, of their environment, of their upbringing, and so on. Faith is something that, as the Apostle Paul would put it in the New Testament, it's something that's not really seen. It's something that you have to actually experience. So what faith is basically can be of some form of religious belief, or you subscribe to a series of things that you endorse and believe in wholeheartedly. That's one issue. Nothing to do with the demonic. However, I'm going to go to the next subject, which is from the beginning of time. This particular scenario has been here and has been taking place and interacting with human beings who walk the earth. This has been happening from the beginning of time. Good and evil are something that has existed and coexisted from the beginning of time when God created the world. The very beginning, of course, as we believe, is that Lucifer was an archangel. He was an attractive. He was loved by God. He was one of God's favorite angels. But for some reason, this angel Lucifer became very, very not only egotistical, wanted the attention, wanted to be just like God. And again, based on my belief system and the belief systems of millions, God would not have. And as a result, God had ousted him out of heaven. With that, Lucifer brought with him 1/3 of the angels that were occupying this place we refer to as heaven. These angels are also referred to as fallen angels. We also recognize them as what we call them in today's world. We call them demons. So these fallen angels are demons. The person who is in charge of all of these demons is the person who started off to begin with, started this thing that we refer to as evil, darkness.
Right.
As a result, Lucifer became known as Satan. Satan, as we know, also is the devil. He is the person who not only motivates but directs all the demons that are here in our realm of existence. As a result, they interact with human beings. If the human being is open to, well, actually, there are many ways why a person would be possessed or have some form of demonic oppression, or even an environment which we would classify as a demonic infestation. What happens is we as human beings, we have this thing called free will. And as a result, within that free will, we want to learn. We become curious. We want to know things. And as a result, it's only a natural phenomenon when a person opens their mind and they want to become better. They want to become special, as I mentioned earlier. As a result, they start looking at things that probably they should never, ever look at. They start looking at the darkness. They start looking at things that are dark. And as a result, their mind is open to other things, other elements. When that occurs, these creatures we call the demonic, they're just waiting. And they're waiting for someone to open their minds and open themselves to whatever they're trying to seek. The demons will step in and they will literally take over. Now, this is the whole scenario in regards to demonic possession. Okay, demonic infestation can be something else. Can be, again, based on your belief system, can be you're allowing and inviting something that's on the other side, something that is dark into your environment. When that occurs, then you have a multiple level demons that will actually take place within your immediate environment. And that becomes a demonic infestation. So there are so many different levels to this. Again, everything boils down to what we talked about earlier, which is your belief system. There are people that will not believe that evil even exists. As a result, that means there's nothing to hedge them within their own negative, bad, dark behavior. You look at serial killers. Serial killers, they have this stare about them. They all have this blank, deep, deep, dark stare. If you look in their eyes, you can almost see a bottomless pit. As a result, they're not all there. Reason being is they have company. And their company, of course, is the darkness that comes from the demonic dark side of what exists in our world.
Hey, this is probably a good little midway point to remind everybody. Please go to my homepage and webpage, rather, steveeasher.com. That's basically the name, Steve with an extra E, Asher.com, and you can follow the show, House of Asher. You can also follow the books that we've got out recently. The most recent is The Hauntings of the St. Vincent's Academy, and you can get on there and correspond about this and that, and also find out about any other signings and little things that we got going on. Ron, is there anything you want to mention?
Well, as you know, or as most people know, these days I'm sort of somewhat retired, if you could retire from this type of occupation. But I can tell you that people can find out more about me if they go on Facebook. I have 6 forums, and one of the forums is The Battle of Good versus Evil Continues with Ron Feyl Enright. They could also just look up my name, and I'm sure it'll come up somewhere on the search engines.
Awesome. And that was something I was thinking about because different but similar. My father had been in law enforcement most of his life. I dabbled in it some myself, but it seems like there are certain callings and certain type of occupations that you never quite leave it, and it never quite leaves you. And it definitely seems like what you've done, I don't see how it could. Really, it seems like once you've kind of walked, I don't want to say this and sound like Hollywood, but you literally have walked in the shadows of some really heinous ancient powers, and it's gotta change you. I mean, because I can just tell in just the time we've talked here and off air and stuff, you're very serious minded. I actually had spoken to a friend of mine asking me about the show when we had actually taken a break. What the listener here doesn't realize, we were doing the first segment and started having really strange audio issues and out of nowhere. And I checked everything. Mics seemed like they were fine. Everything was fine. And rebooted the system and everything, and it was still doing it. And I was going to ask you kind of what was that about? Because you said, yeah, that happens. So I'm going, so you want to expand a little bit on what you mean in regards of having interference and block from things?
Sure. First of all, I'll say that we live in a world full of mysteries. And that also goes for the technology that we now have and we like to think can control. But to the contrary, we are not in control of anything. There are so many elements that are all around us that sometimes we just have to simply accept what's going on and take it from there. I've been on literally hundreds of shows similar to yours, and I could tell you that there's been more than 25%, maybe 30% of these shows have had unexplainable technical issues. So to me, it's no surprise. It has nothing to do with the host or their technicians or their skills. It has a lot to do with the airways, which we have no control over whatsoever. So as a result, things do happen. And when they happen, you just have to kind of step back and say, wow, that's quite interesting, and understand that that's not going to be the first time it's ever going to happen, because history does have a habit of repeating itself. And that's very true. I'll also share one thing to you that in regards to the airways, that goes for not only our computers, our iPhones, and our various other electronic communication devices. But I could remember an incident just happened just a few years ago. I used to use Skype quite often. I used to have meetings once a month, and these were members of my organization. The members of my organization were not only lead investigators, but they were priests and they were bishops, and they were in 20, and they still are, in 24 countries around the world. So we would meet on Skype once a month. We would talk about various issues, various cases, and I'd give them my input and my take in regards to what's going on in their particular assessment. And as a result, all kinds of interesting things would happen. But I recall I was on my phone, and it was an iPhone, and I was talking to one of my priests who was actually on the other side, on the East Coast. And we were talking about a case that he was on, and he was telling me and asking my suggestions, input in regards to various things that should be done. And as we're talking, a voice came over the phone, as if we were sharing a party line. Understand, this was just a regular one-on-one conversation, and this rude person entered the conversation and started identifying us by our first names, which is, in those days, wasn't heard of. We're either known as Father James or Bishop Larry or whatever the situation is. This person just simply called us by our first name and started making suggestions, as he knew exactly what we were talking about, what the confidential case was about, which we shared no information with the public. Every case is analyzed and discussed only within our group. That's within the group of the bishop and his very small jurisdiction of priests who are assigned as exorcists, as well as their team members, in most cases, are laity, who are the actual investigators who investigate and document the details of the case, and also submit their reports to their bishop. In turn, their bishop would submit their reports to me. So no one from outside the victims and the families really know any details. This person actually broke into the conversation, not only knew the details of this confidential case that this priest and I were talking about, but also went into our own personal details about how our lifestyle is, how we're living, where we're living. I mean, this is like more information than most people would ever even have. Even through our advanced technology of the internet, you can't find out detailed personal information as this fellow was able to do it. He identified both the priest, and then he identified me and started like very casually telling us about details about not only our lives, but how we are actually operating and conducting our investigations for these various cases. It was amazing. It was frightening in a way. And I will tell you, in my close to 40 years in dealing with these supernatural situations, I was even put off just a bit and said, wow, this is quite interesting. And then I realized that what we were actually experiencing was an interruption by a invisible, demonic, dark entity that knew everything as to what's going on. The big difference about, and I'm trying to understand this information that I'm trying to convey, is that spiritual entities live outside our time and space. So they could look at our whole time continuum, and they could look at it as a whole and see exactly what's taking place, from what took place 1,000 years ago to the very second that's in our real life situation. So as a result, they could look into a person and they could see not only their past, they could see even some glimpses of their future, because they are outside our time and space. So this is the situation. This demonic individual decided, and I say individual because each demonic entity is an individual in itself. They have different personalities, different traits. They all have one thing in common. They're demons. They've never had a body, except with the exception of the bodies that they possess, such as people, including animals. And as a result, they have never had a body. So as a result, they are this entity. And this entity, which was this dark, demonic entity, decided to cut into our private conversation. And if not anything else, not only to startle us, but just to remind us that they have superior knowledge and superior abilities than we have, because they live outside of our time and space. So they have this all-knowing knowledge of what goes on in our lives. When it comes to the actual technology of it, they have the ability to not only tap in, but they can actually interfere with the waves, with the radio waves, with the telephone waves, with all electronic systems they have and they can have the ability, and they have in many cases, have interfered with our lifestyle by using electronics.
That was one of the things I was going to ask you too, because again, people think, well, the priests are in control. Obviously, you guys are working with a higher power, which is in control. But it's a thing that it makes sense. You're going to make enemies. They're going to watch you. They're going to stalk you to a point. Beyond this, have you had encounters like this, either strange people or strange shadows or strange happenstances happening, odd accidents, things that would seemingly seem random to someone who's outside of this? And I don't mean it to try to make you paranoid about it, which, it depends on who you talk to. Some people said paranoia is just, being spatially aware. There's a certain amount of paranoia is good, I guess, to be aware of where you're at. But have you encountered anything like that, say, beyond that situation you just mentioned?
Yes, I have a brief story to share with you, but before I do, even the term paranoia, it's a psychological term. It's a perception of what a group of scientists, if you will, if you want to call them scientists, will come to the conclusion that this would be what the definition should be in terms of what we're going to call paranoid or paranoia. Let me just say this, and what we're talking about is just beyond the natural understanding of the whole term itself. Trying to get back on track to what we're talking about, I'm sitting in front of my computer, and what I do and have done was assessments. People, my members from around the world, would send me reports in regards to their assessment, in regards to what they have witnessed and documented. I was sitting behind my computer, and I'm looking at my computer screen. Now, I've told this story before, but it's worth repeating again because I think it's quite interesting and it fits in what we're talking about. So I'm staring at my computer screen, my monitor, and as I'm doing that, I'm looking at the actual taped first contact interview that was being done. And on that, of course, I'm looking at not only their facial expressions, I'm listening to the answers to each question that's directed to them, but I'm also looking at all the other things that might fall into the manifestations of the moment. That is, things that are actually happening while the interview is being conducted. So maybe something would move, something would, maybe some sound would occur, something in this nature. So I'm staring at my computer monitor intensely, and I'm looking and studying, as I do with every case, to make my own final assessment based on the evidence that our investigators have submitted. I'm staring at my computer screen, and all of a sudden, I'm looking at the interview, looking for manifestations and things of this nature. All of a sudden, this black fuzz appears on my computer monitor. It starts off at the very corner of the monitor of my screen, and it starts moving slowly from left to right. Now, I thought it was just a glitch. I figured, well, maybe it's when they were taping it, maybe there was some kind of dust or a fuzz or something. So I'm always trying to explain before I jump to conclusions. So I'm looking at this black fuzz, and as it starts to move from one end of my screen to the other, it's about maybe, I'd say, an inch in diameter. And it's that large, and it's moving from one end of my screen to the other. So I'm staring at at first I tried to ignore it, thinking it's just a technical problem. But then, as I'm looking at the interview, then this fuzz somehow got my attention once again and took my attention away from what was happening during as the interview was being conducted. It took my attention away for just a second. Then I saw this fuzz from left to right, and then it traveled from right to left, slowly, but just slow enough to get my attention. So my attention was right there. I had to look closer. I looked my face, my nose, maybe 2 inches from the screen of my monitor as I'm staring. I'm saying, what the heck? And as it was slowly going back and forth, it did this about 4 or 5 times, and slowly, to a point, it took my attention away from the actual interview and onto the fuzz. The fuzz finally decided to move from the right side of my screen to the center of my screen. I'm looking at it, and at that moment, it started, in terms of size, it started to magnify its shape and literally, are you ready for this? Pushed me away from my computer, I'd say at least a couple of feet. I'm sitting in my chair. I was pushed to the back part of my chair, and my chair has wheels on it, so it might literally my chair must have went back about maybe 3 or 4 feet. I felt a sensation in my chest area, and sure enough, whatever energy that was, it pushed me away from the screen and totally got my attention away from what was actually happening in the assessment. Because what happened was, and I'm going to explain how this is, what happens is it was a demonic entity that was happening at that particular time. I have to tell you, since the demonic is outside our time and space, 1,000 years could be a second for them. This assessment that I was watching and reviewing was done a month ago, a month before I was actually watching it.
Right.
So it wasn't in real time. However, the demonic entity was. The demonic entity was there in real time a month ago, as they were there right now at the second as I was watching the monitor, the actual assessment. So if you could follow what I'm saying, since the demonic entities are outside time and space, they could move through time like within not even a fraction of a second, and move like from thousands of years from one end to the other, and they could be there. This is exactly what happened. So I'm watching this actual assessment that was taken a month ago, and yet the demonic was still in real time because it doesn't affect them. And so it made itself known by pushing me away from the computer. Now, this makes it even more interesting, and yet I've posted pictures of this online. I picked up my shirt and I had a print on my body as a result, as if someone smacked me or just clobbered me and pushed me away from my computer.
Well,
to me, that was physical evidence. I took pictures of it.
Okay, let me just try it. Not only did it come seemingly through the computer and move you back, it literally hit you hard enough it left evidence on your body.
The reason I think this happened was to show that what I was experiencing was not only real. It was not only just something that maybe my imagination had conjured up because of my past experiences, but rather it showed me that I was part of what was going on, and that I myself can be in mortal danger.
Right. Well, I mean, and that's the craziest thing, too, that I think people, again, Hollywood, and do all this different stuff, and they kind of flirt with different things and invite things, even, unknowingly or unintentionally. And there have been real life and death consequences with this. And I think that's sort of the, what's the old saying, the greatest trick the devil ever did is to convince you he wasn't real. And be it someone who is of another faith, a lot of times it seems like they, again, will still have the same sort of possibility of threat and physical involvement. If you were talking to somebody who was trying to kind of do this stuff on their own, and, I talk to a lot of people, I'm not a demonologist in any way. I've read about hierarchies of demons and things like that is just part of research, but that's not my thing. That's way above my pay scale. And so what would you tell people who are somewhat flirting with this or have an interest in it? What would you tell these guys? Would you say, look, obviously leave it alone, or, take these precautions, or just in your own words, how do you feel about kind of like lay demonologist?
Well, your knowledge of anything in life, I think, can be a very good advantage, or it could be a disadvantage. But if we're talking about a person doing an ancient ritual, which is designed to drive literally the demon out of an individual, I think we need to look at that a little closer and say, if you're in that position, number one, make sure that you have a divine calling, because the power itself doesn't come from your ego. it doesn't come from a certificate that you may be hanging on a wall. It comes from the power of God. Now, to believe this, you have to have a whole different perspective as to what's really taking place. To have a calling is one thing, but it has to be from God. If it's inspired by God and it's of a divine nature, then you would probably be likely to get into maybe enroll in a seminary, become a clergyman, become ordained. And even then, after your ordination, it doesn't mean and it doesn't qualify you as an exorcist. What happens is the church body that you belong to, the elders of the church or the bishops of the church, they have to elect you and appoint you to the position of an exorcist for that jurisdiction. And then even then, you're still not an exorcist because you have to go through a training period. You have to have a mentor. In most cases, it's a bishop who will take you under their wing and you will assist them for a number of years. Once that happens, God will allow things to happen where it will be time that everyone will know that you're ready to actually do a solo. So you see, the whole process, it's not like going online and ordering a certificate that says you're an exorcist. It doesn't work that way. It
Right.
doesn't even work being a minister and thinking you can do an exorcism. It doesn't work that way either. Every minister, every priest, every bishop, they have their own mission in life. They have their own calling. Some people are called to be a pastoral minister, to have a church or a parish, to lead that way. There are many clergymen who are teachers and they lecture in Bible colleges, and that's their calling, that's their mission. There are other different clergy that are called to do a prison ministry or a hospital ministry. You know, there are so many different callings, okay, within the ministry itself, within being a clergyman. To be an exorcist, you have to have a divine calling, and then that becomes your specialty. That's all you do. You're not a parish priest. You're not a priest that does visitations to the sick unless it's of a demonic nature. What happens is specialize in a particular profession within being a clergyman, and then you find someone who is already in that profession. In this case, as I mentioned, a mentor who can take you under their wing. In most cases, mentors are bishops, and they're much older, and they've been in the ministry for many years, and they've had lots of experience, and they have a calling in the very beginning. So you have a whole bunch of stages to even become an exorcist. So to answer your question, and I'm sorry I'm taking so long to get to answering it, but I think it's important that I tell you and articulate the details that you cannot be an exorcist unless you have a calling. And when you have a calling, you need to be a minister, have ministry training, and after that, then you have to approach a bishop and ask them, let them know that you feel you have a calling and you like to go into the ministry of exorcism. At that point, the jurisdictional bishop would grant you that opportunity and assign you to a mentor, or maybe you already have a mentor who happens to be an exorcist. And then at that point, your bishop will allow that to happen. You get the training, which is not overnight. As I said, for me, it was 4 years. Okay, but that's just assisting for 4 years. Some people, it's like 10 years. So some people, it's like maybe 2. It just depends on what your spiritual level of understanding and what blessings God has given you as an individual. Okay, based on that, okay, after your training, then and only then are you appointed as a exorcist for that particular jurisdiction, that particular church or number of churches, that particular area or district. But that's how it works. You just don't come out one day and say, I got a certificate and it says I'm an exorcist, and bam, there you have it. It's not an instant thing. And now let me tell you one other thing. If these people, and there's quite a few of them, that are and go under the heading of the exorcist, okay, they are, and without the calling, without the divine calling and the training, they can do more harm than good to the victim, because The whole thing is your intent and motive. If you don't have a calling, if you don't have the training, and you go out and you present yourself as an exorcist because you saw the movie and maybe read a couple of books, okay, and if you do it, you're doing more harm than good, because it's all about your ego. It's all about how you want people to perceive you. It's all about making a name for yourself. It's not about the victim. The victim is in the hands of someone who is not a legitimate church appointed, called by God exorcist. So therefore, that poor individual, that victim, his condition can worsen. And not only that, but the person who is calling himself an exorcist can also be in spiritual danger, because that's a great opening for demonic oppression to come in, because your mind would be open to this mightier and than thou wanting to be, well-known, famous, whatever, trying to make a name for themselves, and it's not about the victim. And this is the best opening for the demonic to come into an individual and just fuel those ideas. The condition of demonic oppression, it's so subtle. You think that it's your own idea. You think it's your own creativity, and to the contrary, it's a seed that's being planted into your mind, and as a result, you act on that seed, thinking it's your idea, when in reality, it's actually demonic influence that has infiltrated into your mind. So when that happens, and a lot of these people who are not legitimate exorcists, these people have that condition which is called demonic oppression. Now, granted, there may be some clergy people that may disagree with me, but I need to also say one other thing. Your denomination has no bearing. The demonic doesn't care what church you belong to. The demonic doesn't care what you call yourself. Demonic, they just don't care. They have their own agenda, and their own agenda is to wait until there's an opening so they could actually influence a person's mind and body.
Right. Ron, yeah, I could keep talking to you all day, but we're just about at the point we're out of time. I would love to have you back on, and if you don't mind, after I do this quick outro, I would love to talk to you off air in just a few minutes.
Of course, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And there you have it, folks. Ronald Feyl Enright. Check out his page, orderofexorcist.com. Please, if you have any questions, contact him. He's a very, very knowledgeable man, very sweet man, and I'm sure he'll help you out with anything that he can. But that's it, folks. Go out there, enjoy the sunshine, enjoy your day. But as the sun sets and the shadows grow long, make sure to check beneath your bed, in your closet, and back down that back hallway. You never know what you may encounter. Maybe it's something good, maybe it's something negative. But through faith and learning and through knowledge, you can overcome most things. Thank you again for being here. Please check out stevieasher.com. Check out my page on YouTube, and also Paranormal UK Radio. All the new guys over there, thank you again for having me on. It's been a real blessing. And I want to say until next time, stay scared, everybody, and be well.